I think Satya Nadella is one of today's greatest CEOs, but it's not because of the latest tech trends that he always seems to stay ahead of, but rather the communication skills, his leadership, his presence that he exhibits to make himself seem so relatable, so inspiring for many others. Let's break down one of Satya's most watched interviews to show you what you can take from Satya to become a leader that everyone can connect with.
You've now had to follow Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer, two legendary figures. Did you feel at that time that you were really ready for the job following those legends, or were you saying, hey, I can do a better job than they did?
This is an example of a no-win question. If you answer yes, you come off as overconfident and not respectful of the legacy that Bill and Steve left behind. But if you say no, you come off as being too unsure of yourself. So watch how Satya responds.
The best advice I got from both Bill and Steve, I think helped me a lot, because their clear message was, don't try to be like us. Don't even bother to sort of say, oh, I'm succeeding these people. Just be your own. In fact, I remember very distinctly, even during the interview process, this is for the board was conducting, they asked me, hey, do you want to be the CEO? And I said, only if you want me to be the CEO. And the feedback I got was, well, but people who want to be CEOs are like, I want to be CEO. I said, look, that's not me. And I remember going and talking to Steve, and he says, yeah, just be yourself. It's too late to change.
When you're given a no-win question, answer the question behind the question. In this case, the question behind the question is, what was your mindset when you came in as CEO? The second noteworthy part about his answer is that Satya comes off as more credible because he's telling a compelling story. One might presume his answer would be too politically correct and easy because it's the simple answer to say that he's just following his own path. But Satya comes off as genuine because he's reenacting dialogue that happened in the past. Do you want to be CEO? Only if you want me to be CEO. Reenact the most important parts of your dialogue to emphasize that even the most politically correct answers can be seen as credible and authentic.
Since you've been the CEO, 3.5 years, the stock is up about, I guess it's about 120%. When you go to your annual shareholder meetings, do you get a standing ovation for what you've done?
No, I get a lot of people asking me, hey, look, come home and fix my computer.
Okay.
To be funny, give the exact opposite answer to what people expect. Watch him do this again as he talks about his relationship with his father.
My dad was a very different guy than me in terms of, let me say, his academic prowess. So it is always humorous, which you look at my report cards and he says, oh, I don't understand how anybody can have these kind of marks. But the nice thing about it was he would say it in such endearing ways that it never made me feel bad.
You mean the marks weren't high enough or weren't?
Not high enough.
They weren't high enough.
Because, yeah, the guy had never met an exam he didn't ace, as he would say.
Okay.
And so he was like, it was astounding to me that he would have a son who couldn't ace an exam.
Now, your father's still alive?
Yes.
And he must be very proud of what you've achieved.
Not enough.
The key is to identify the moments from your childhood, from your background that are very relatable to others. That way it'll cause everyone to smile because when they hear your story, they'll reflect on their own.
So you're beginning your ascent up, but you're dealing with some personal issues. Your first child was born with cerebral palsy. He is now 21 years old. So how did you realize that was going to change your life, and how have you dealt with that issue?
Yeah, even...
Great leaders are not afraid to let their emotions show, even when they feel most vulnerable. Notice how Satya's voice cracks just a little bit as he looks up to reflect. Now, why do we notice this sudden change in Satya's demeanor and the change in his voice? Well, it's because Satya actually does a great job at maintaining what we call a neutral body position. His facial expression, for example, is pretty consistent. He's constantly smiling. He locks great eye contact with David Rubenstein throughout the interview. He sits cross-legged. When you find your natural, neutral body position, any movement that you make becomes strategic. You can accentuate your feelings that much more by pausing, by using vocal inflection, by looking up to illustrate that you're actually thinking about a response.
I was 29 years old when Zain, our son, was born, and if you had even asked me maybe even an hour before he was born what was going through my head, it was all about, oh, is the nursery going to be ready? What's going to happen to our weekends now we have a son? And when will Anu, my wife, get back to a job and so on? But obviously everything changed that night. He was born because of an undetected in utero distress, asphyxiation, with severe brain damage, and that led to cerebral palsy, and he's quadriplegic now. The first, I would say, David, maybe even 2 years or more even, I was more about like, why did this happen to me? What happened to us? And all of these plans that I had are now all been thrown up in the air and changed.
Great leaders are willing to be vulnerable. And to be vulnerable, you need to take your audience inside of your mind. And it's particularly noteworthy that Satya is willing to share the woe is me negative thoughts that he has when he finds out about Zane's diagnosis, even though it doesn't portray him in the best light. But the key is he's not afraid to be real. Now watch how he turns this around.
Whereas Anu, my wife, what came naturally to her as a mother was she said, okay, I'm not going back to my job. I'm going to really care for my son, drive him around for therapy after therapy. And I watched that. Without schooling me, I got schooled. That nothing happened to me. What happened was to my son, and that it was time for me to understand that, realize that, see life through his eyes, and then do my duty as a father. That, to me, perhaps, it didn't come in one moment. It's something that I think took time. But as I figured it out, it changed me, both as obviously a parent, but also who I am today and how I approach everything.
The best leaders, from Phil Jackson to Larry Page to even Ted Lasso, are the best learners. What I mean is they're willing to put their ego aside and learn from anybody. For example, Satya mentions how Zane actually teaches him how to be a better parent to his daughter who also has a disability. And watch how Satya applies this learning from parenthood into multiple realms in life.
And one of the qualities that you say you got from all this was empathy, and that the result of having empathy made you a better CEO and a better person. Is that fair?
Yeah, in fact, when I look at empathy, and most people think empathy is just something that you reserve, for your life and your family and your friends or what have you, but the reality is, I think it's an existential priority for a business. Because if you look at it, like, what is our business? Our business is to meet unmet, unarticulated needs of customers. There is no way our innovation to meet unmet, unarticulated needs is going to come about if we don't listen. Not just listen to the words, but go deep to understand what the needs are behind it. So I think empathy is core to innovation. And life's experience, if you listen and you learn from, teaches you. I wouldn't claim, as I've sort of even talked about it, with any innate capability of empathy that I was born with. If anything, it's life that has taught me. And if anything, my pursuit is every year, is there growing sense of empathy for people around me?
When you're given a simple yes or no question, take that opportunity to actually give the why behind your yes or no. Satya goes one step further to articulate the why behind the empathy. Empathy is actually mission critical and often overlooked when it comes to the success of a business.
So you get to be the CEO of this company. You're following two legendary figures. How do you go to them and say, by the way, a lot of things you did, I don't want to do anymore. I'm going to change things?
This is another difficult question to answer. It would be very easy to criticize Bill and Steve's work while taking Microsoft in the opposite direction. But let's examine Satya's response.
I was a consummate insider, right? I'd spent 22 years or so when I became CEO. Growing up in the company that Bill and Steve built, I understood like the back of my palm all the things we got right and all the things we got wrong. And I had a point of view on what I wanted to do if I was going to become CEO. It was not about trying to criticize our past or praise the past. It was about what do we do in the future.
The key here is to never speak poorly of anyone in public and lean on facts that people cannot dispute. The 22 years of being at Microsoft and seeing all of their successes and failures before becoming CEO is something that cannot be disputed by anyone. Yet he explicitly mentions that it's not about criticizing the past.
You gave a statement about women's pay at one point, and you correctly, I think, changed your position the next day. But can you explain what happened?
For women who aren't comfortable with asking for a raise or sort of saying, who aren't the younger you, let's say, what's your advice for them?
It's not really about asking for the raise, but knowing and having faith that the system will actually give you the right raises as you go along. One of the additional superpowers that, quite frankly, women who don't ask for a raise have, because that's good karma. It'll come back.
This is one of the very few things I disagree with you on.
I was asked about pay equity. In fact, I just gave such an absolute nonsensical answer, which Maria Clave, who was interviewing me, was kind enough to correct me while I was on stage itself. Because I was answering a question literally using my own personal experience, without understanding the broader context, the depth of that question, which is, what is a person like me, who is a CEO of a company, doing to make sure that, one, women can fully participate in our companies and in our economies. There is equal pay for equal work, and more importantly, there is equal opportunity for equal work. That was the real question. It was not about like, okay, what worked for you and what career advice do you have for me? So that's a realization, which I thought I had, quite frankly. But I'm glad I messed up so publicly, because I think I internalized the lessons from it.
The key for you is to own up to your mistakes when you make them. People who work for you, who follow you, understand that you're going to make mistakes, and that's okay as long as you pick yourself up from them and explain exactly what you learned from them. In this case, Satya doesn't sugarcoat things. It was a nonsensical answer. More importantly, he explains why making that mistake in public was actually the best thing that happened to him.
You have about 125,000 employees, something like that. So what percentage are male, what percentage are female, and how many senior women do you have? Technology is not a place where a lot of women have risen to the top yet, relatively speaking.
This is another difficult question to answer. If you strictly respond with the statistics as they're asked, it wouldn't paint Microsoft in a great light. So watch how Satya positions his answer here.
In fact, one of the things that we have made some good progress on is on the women's representation, which we have a long way to go. I mean, you got to remember that in tech, we have a particularly tougher issue because of technology disparity in terms of gender diversity. But let's start with the progress, which is, in the last year, we improved to 27.7% of women coming into the organization, which is around 2 points more than historical. Right. And in the technology side, where we've improved by 4 points. So that's, I would say, movement in the right direction, but not enough, obviously. One of the other things our board also did was to change the compensation system for me as well as my direct reports to say, look, numeric progress, besides all the work that we may do, programs we may have, and the talk, let's even tie compensation of the senior-most people, including the CEO, to real numerical progress. And so we're doing everything, but quite frankly, it's going to take continuous vigilance, continuous push, and it's a top-of-mind issue for all of us.
There are two things that I'm noticing here. The first is to anchor your numerical answer in something that's positive. Now, numerical answers can be interpreted in ways that you don't intend. For example, if Satya were to say that 80% of the workforce is male at Microsoft, that would come off as really tone-deaf to the topic of gender diversity. But instead, Satya anchors his answer in progress. He gives a numerical answer of 27.7% are female, but he focuses on the improvements overall at Microsoft and specifically within the tech sector. The second is to acknowledge when your efforts are just not enough. If Satya were to solely talk about what Microsoft is doing to address the problem, but not actually acknowledge that it's just not enough, then he would come off as extremely tone-deaf and one who's not personally invested in this issue. Now, it can be really hard to remember all of these leadership communication tips and put them into practice. So subscribe to my newsletter at prestonchin.substack.com, where you can up-level your confidence, your charisma, and your communication in order to become a leader that people instantly respect. If you like this video, watch this breakdown of one of college football's most prominent head coaches, Deion Sanders, to show you how you can take your leadership communication skills to the next level. Thanks for watching.